Good morning, everyone. Buenos dias. My colleagues and I want to welcome you to our presentation, Creating a Framework for Your Residential Experience Model. We have a lot of content in this presentation, so we are going to ask that if you have questions, just go ahead and write those down for now. We will be doing a question and answer at the end, but we really want to get through all of the things that we're doing here at Georgia Tech, and we're definitely going to be using up all the time we have here. So we're going to go ahead and do some introductions. So my name is Chris Ruiz. My pronouns are he, him. I have worked at Georgia Tech for 11 years. 7 of those years have been in this role as an area manager, but I also worked there as a hall director. So I have a lot of context for kind of like what implementation for residence programs look like. My experience with residential programs, like Mandy, began when I was an RA. My institution, Texas Tech University, had started a residential curriculum journey way back when. Those experiences ultimately led me here to Georgia Tech, where we were on a path to curriculum, but just not there yet.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Andrew Pasch. I also serve with Chris as area manager here at Georgia Tech. I just celebrated my 7-year anniversary in my role here as area manager. I have experience working with programming models, as well as served on learning outcome and residential curriculum committee here at Georgia Tech as we've implemented that, as well as our shift that we'll be telling you a little bit about today.
And good morning, everyone. My name is Mandy Morgan, she, hers. Like these two fine fellows, I am also an area manager at Georgia Tech. I just passed my 6-year anniversary with Georgia Tech in this role. My background is actually in leadership education, but I also have my master's degree like Chris and Pasch in College Student Affairs Administration. My time in housing actually started after postgraduate work at the Savannah College of Art and Design in Savannah, Georgia, where I served as a resident director. And while I was there, I was able to use my experience in curriculum development to build out our on-campus programmatic model and our educational targets for that institution. And I was able to bring over that knowledge to Georgia Tech. And I've enjoyed working with Chris and Pasch as we've developed out this program model for the past couple of years.
So today we're going to take you on a journey through community engagement. As all programs in housing or even higher education, there are many pit stops and rerouting that can occur in our programs. We see this as a journey to a destination of community engagement. So we're going to walk through our RSD community engagement model in a pretty amount of detail. And with all programs or services, we need a way to measure it. So we're going to talk about our assessment strategies and some of the tools that we use to really understand what's going on in our communities. And then finally, we're going to give you an opportunity to reflect on your own programs by engaging in a retrospective. This is an activity that we heavily use during our process of getting to where we are now. It has provided us with a lot of opportunity for reflection on our own programs, but will help in modifying your programs as well. So this is what we're hoping for at the end of this presentation that you'll get out of the presentation. We want you to understand how an institution modifies the residential experience from curriculum to an engagement model. So this is going to be a shift from what we typically think of when we're going from an engagement or programming model to a curricular model. Recognize different tools for staff to use when training, implementing, and collecting data for a residential program. So each of our institutions are probably going to have different resources. We're going to show you what we utilize, but know that there are probably ways to adapt what you're already using in a way that will be functional for you. Analyze the current strategies your institution implements into your residential program. So just ensuring that you're able to really look at what you're doing and start asking some of those questions about your model and what you would like to do in the future. All right, so we're going to do a poll. So the question is, what is your residential education program based on? So if you want, you can type that in the chat. So like there are lots of different options. You know, there's a curricular approach, there's programming, learning outcome driven, leadership, well-being, or maybe there's others that people use, but just trying to get a sense of like what approaches do y'all use? Okay, I see a fair amount of curricular approach, programming, learning outcome driven, programming with learning outcomes, yes. Curriculum. Yeah, like it definitely looks like we are in a curriculum space right now. And that's really cool to see. And thankfully, because a lot of you are in that space, you already know a lot of the things related to the curricular approach. So we're not really going to go into the details of like how to create a curricular approach, but we are going to talk about some of the things that we learned from that approach that inform what we are currently doing. So thank you everyone for that. Like it looks like there's a lot of good work out there. All right, so let's take a trip down memory lane. So we're gonna start with 2008. Wow, wasn't it great? Do y'all remember 2008? I do, I was still in grad school, but a lot of things went down that year. That's a different story. So in 2008, there was a task force that was created at Georgia Tech to shift a highly programmatic and service residence education model into a learning outcome-based programming model. One thing that I'd like to mention is that the Georgia Tech student profile really informed what we felt like we can accomplish. So Georgia Tech students are high achieving, determined. The academic rigor is, in a word, challenging, but they're also innovative and they ask a lot of questions. So there's this inquisitiveness that they possess. So when we were going through this process, we just really had to center the type of student we had in this experience. So that way we can build off of that. We also know that the degree program thrusts them into experiential settings. So we wanted to be sure that we were looking at things from an experiential lens. So back to the task force. They took about 120 learning outcomes and narrowed them down to 16 learning outcomes under 4 strategic dimensions. So they had community engagement, discovery, personal development, professional development. We were also utilizing uniform assessments through Survey Gizmo designed by one of our ADs who had a strength for assessment. So let's fast forward to 2012. We went through some staffing changes. We hired an assistant director who had a specific skill set in curriculum development. This is really when we started to do our archaeological dig. We pulled together a task force. We reviewed our practices, looking at CAS standards, looking at our institute strategic plan, also looking at the degree programs that our institute offers. We started to integrate self-authorship and experiential theory, as well as Bloom's taxonomy to really build the curriculum. Progress in service is the motto for Georgia Tech, so we use that to help in framing our learning goals and outcomes through an educational priority of civic responsibility. In 2013, we launched our newly created residential curriculum. We built out outcomes for students who lived in our first year upper class and grad and family communities. Keeping in mind, we used Bloom's taxonomy and what we knew about our students to really frame what their experience would look like, especially when they begin their journey living with us in housing. We continue to use that model for around 6 years. Our hall directors became experts for their educational experience, but our RAs were more focused on the community building aspects. I will say that the RAs did not start that way. We wanted them to be using the learning outcomes as well, but what we found was this really shouldn't be their focus. Hall directors were in charge of creating educational development plans for their areas and really took ownership of that. The experience at this point was very prescriptive and scaffolded though. We used monthly meetings to review what we were doing and adapt. Through those meetings, we were able to utilize some assessments and using SCAG factor data to inform what we needed to do with our residential curriculum. Then 2019 happened. We took a pause and began our current journey back to a community engagement model. We used a pyramid to actualize our goals, with safety being at the bottom, then involvement, then community. Our vision for the department also shifted to align with this focus to really focus the model a little bit more on community engagement. We kept some elements of the curriculum and some of our language, but the way we asked our staff to program looked different. We kept the community engagement plan, so our hall directors would still have control over what they're doing in their area and what they experience to provide for their residents. Then 2020 happened. We once again had to pivot the ways in which we built community. With the motto of socially together, physically apart, we adapted our services to be virtual. This was a new skill set for a lot of us. The ways in which people could gather shifted us to ensuring that our RAs were creating more one-on-one connections with their residents. We also changed some of our metrics. Those will be talked about now as I pass things over to Andrew.
Thank you, Chris. So thank you, Chris, for sharing a little bit of the overview of our history of connection here at Georgia Tech. And so now we're going to take some time to kind of walk you through how we've built that experience out in this last year and share some of the tools and mindset that we've been developed to implement this here at Georgia Tech. So this summer, we received a charge with the theme of socially together, physically apart. This was a charge from our leadership. And honestly, it was given to us during a time where we were trying to figure out how we were coming back to campus, how we were bringing our students back to campus, and realizing that we still needed to have a commitment to building connections in a time during this pandemic that has been very isolating. And so we needed to figure out how we could do that, but also do that in a safe way. Over the last couple of years, we've been developing this goal, our Project 100, which has really become a mantra for us as we are getting back to the core of engaging with students and helping them feel like they are a part of the community. And so this is a little snapshot of how we talk about Project 100. So this is something from a curricular mindset about how everything is intertwined into what we're trying to do. And so we kept that mindset, but really was planning on moving forward for that in terms of building community. And so our goal is the same. And we believe that everything that we ask our staff down from RAs to hall directors to everybody else in the department, that everything really builds back to this concept of Project 100. And so this is an example of something that is in our manual and how we visualize our expectations for our student staff, as well as trying to tell them, like, because we have an expectation that our student staff are working 12 to 15 hours on different tasks of a given week. But some of those tasks can be hard to determine, like, how much time they should be spending on that. And so this is an example of how we've done that. But I show this to show in the sense that Project 100 is our mantra. We want to engage 100% of our residents one interaction at a time. From there, we were given some measures of success. These measures of success are primarily connected to our yearly satisfaction surveys that we do in the spring. And so we wanted these measures of success to tell us a little bit of where we needed to focus. So as you can see, we want 70% of our residents to feel like they're a part of a community, and 70% of those residents to interact with RAs once a week. We also want our hall director's name to be known 100% of the time, as well as 80% of residents report that they were helped to connect to campus resources. From there, we started looking at expectations. So as Chris was telling you a little bit before, we had, in previous iterations of our plans, asked our RAs to jump in on the learning outcomes and the facilitation guides and programs that should be connected to the educational side of the house. And so we really wanted them to take a little bit of a different course. And so for RAs, we really wanted them to focus solely on engagement. So we're asking them to connect weekly in different initiatives or strategies, as well as focusing on making it a one-on-one interaction with their residents every other week. And so with this, we gave them the focus of really being visible and available and to connect and support our residents. Then to our hall directors, master levels professionals, we have asked them to focus on the educational plan, on creating a comprehensive plan, expectations for their halls, and really building out a vision of how they implement that within their area. And so they are the ones that have the expertise, and we want them to focus on the educational initiatives. And then for our mid-level managers or our area managers, like the three of us, our focus is on data management, creating assessments, tools, interpreting and reporting on the data. I would be remiss if we didn't talk a little bit about how COVID impacted our ability to do our work this year. I know, as all of you probably know, it did not make that work easy. And so we did come up with a lot of expectations. We did some training, gave some resources, ideas about how to do that. But essentially what we landed on in the beginning in the fall is we needed to put an emphasis on virtual programming and virtual interactions. Historically, we had not asked our RAs to really primarily focus on face-to-face interactions, but we knew that we needed to be able to open that up for them. And so we did have the allowance for some virtual interactions, text, video calls, and different things like that. And with that, I'm going to pass it on to my colleague Mandy to talk a little bit about the next tool that we developed, which is our residential student experience manual.
Thank you, Andrew. So Chris and Andrew did a really great job of kind of laying the foundation of our history, why we're doing what we're doing. So now we're going to get into more so the how we do what we do and how we train our staff to do what we're asking them to do. So one of the pieces that has been a foundational kind of artifact, lack of a better word, manual that we call upon again and again, we revisit each year, is our residential student experience manual. When we're reviewing kind of our approach for each year, we really use this as an intentional way to serve as a one-stop shop for our training and also for serving as our written history of what we've done each year. It's been a very robust document. It's about 40 pages for us, and it lays out all the pieces that we've talked about, and also the pieces that we have yet to discuss.
No, it's real. It's real. Like, you see me right here?
I'm just as a reminder for folks, if you can, please put yourself on mute. It's okay. So within the manual, there are a couple of pieces that are really important to highlight. And one of the things that we wanted just to make sure that was a forefront of our experience of building this out is if we had the ability to hire staff during the year, we wanted to use this as a mechanism to essentially train folks on the spot. That it would be a really great start for a professional staff member coming in to review the material and understand what they're going to be asked to do, whatever role they may be serving in, as a student staff member, a hall director, an area manager, or even our director level staff. So the document is dense, but we have done a really great job of making sure it's not muddled. We've done a really intentional job at pacing out how we utilize this document to one, start with why we do what we do, to build into those specific dimensions, and really scaffolding the work with the implementation of the resources that we then outline. So just to go on to kind of what some of those resources are. One of the pieces that does continue to come back each year within our manual is the focus of our educational focus areas. This has served to help guide our focus for our active initiatives and also all of our strategic programming. And also directly relates back to the needs that we see for our Georgia Tech students on a yearly basis. And also kind of the pieces that our upward leadership and also our stakeholders across campus within student affairs see as a continuous need to address and provide great educational programming to. And those four areas are alcohol and other drug education, diversity and inclusion, health and wellness, and safety security. Georgia Tech is a highly global campus that has a wonderful student population. And one of the things that we know about the rigor of the institution is the pacing that they need and the support that they need to be able to come back and feel like they're not just a student at the end of the day, but they're a person. So we've done a really intentional job at building out and scaffolding out our initiative models to help address and provide resources to each of these areas to our students and at various levels. Andrew spoke to some of the expectations that we have for our student staff, but also for our hall director and area manager staff providing engagement opportunities. Now, how do we kind of provide those engagement opportunities? And we do those through our 4 targeted community engagement strategies. Now, this is something that we kind of carried over again from our move from a more curricular-based model, but we found that these 4 areas have continued to be some of our hallmark pieces for how we do what we do. And those are community meetings, active initiatives, passive initiatives, and resident conversations. And a little bit, Andrew's going to highlight a specific example of resident conversations in action of how they apply to our assessment strategy. But just to give a little bit of a highlight to some of the areas in case the language is a little bit confusing to you. We see our active initiatives as our active programs. So these may be your weekly programs, your hallmark tradition programs that may be something tied to a specific hall that have been traditions. And our passive initiatives are those, of course, that are passive. So these may be our bulletin boards, any type of passive engagement activity, whether it's a U Rocks program or any type of Valentine's or any recognition-based programs that our hall directors or our student staff choose to implement as well. And community meetings, pretty straightforward. These are our opening and closing meetings, the first floor meetings of the semester, but we also build these in intentionally because we've seen at Georgia Tech the need to use this space to address maybe community behaviors. So at around times of the end of the semester, if there is a collective issue in a hall that seems to be reoccurring, we encourage our student staff and our hall director staff to utilize this strategic engagement strategy to address those needs and to help correct those behaviors. Now, one of the pieces that's also really important when we were building out this manual was to also not only use this as a way to tell, or not tell, but to explain what we're going to do, but also provide resources for how they're going to do what they're going to do. So one of the examples that we actually provided was an example of our month-to-month strategies that help to address and provide suggestions to needs or activities that address different issues that may arise during the year for our different populations. And so one of our colleagues, Sherry Murray, this is something that she's developed a couple years ago in one of the many iterations of our residential student experience. And one of the things we really found that this is some vital information and really concrete resources that our staff can go back to and again, call upon. One of the pieces that we found about our Georgia Tech students is sometimes they're a little bit not necessarily engaging that good +1 thinking when it comes to creative programs that they could potentially bring to their hall, whether active, passive, or through resident conversations. And so we wanted to be intentional in providing these different resources to help scale and to help essentially bring bite-sized portions to the work that they're doing on a day-to-day, week-to-week, but also through a year. Now, when we talk about these resources and when we talk about how we've staged out the plan, one of the pieces that was also really important for Chris, Andrew, and I was to be intentional for how we were going to translate this for our hall director staff so they're able to create their own nuanced and individualized plans for their communities. And we do this through a tool that we refer to as our community engagement plans, or CEPs. So the CEPs are specific to the individual communities. This is where we've provided all the resources, expectations from our resident student experience approach, from our departmental leadership. And this is where our hall directors can take all this information and turn it into an experience that's going to benefit their specific residents. This also helps to reflect the needs of the specific programs or populations within their communities. So within our hall directors experience, they may have specific athletic groups or specific living learning communities. And those partnerships are really key in for them to think about how they're staging out the cadence for their community engagement experience for the year as well. But one of the pieces that's also really great about our community engagement plans and the approach that our hall directors take is it's nimble. So we always do about a mid-year check-in to see what needs to maybe be tweaked or fine-tuned or maybe revisited because of the residential populations that have come in. Now, I kindly asked one of my hall directors, Quenisha Humes, if she would be comfortable, and she's actually attending SEAHO this week, so if you interact with her, tell her good job, who graciously allowed me to kind of share an example of her community engagement plan for the year. So Quenisha is a wonderful staff member, like how many of us during this time of COVID-19 had the opportunity to have another community kind of added to her repertoire this year. So she serves as the hall director for 2 specialized first-year communities, our honors program, and then our Explore LLC. And Explore is our living learning community tied to College of Sciences and also our pre-med program. And so typically those are 2 very distinct communities overseen by 2 different hall directors. But one of the things Quenisha wanted to make sure that was clear with her staff and clear in their community engagement approach this year was that they were all in this together. So her theme for the year was Connect 4, literally connecting together the 4 physical buildings to this one engagement approach. Now, her community engagement plan is really robust. It has a lot of really fantastic details in it that list out by month, but a couple pieces I wanted to highlight within the plan of note were just this yearly capture of what was going to be focused on in each month for the fall and spring semester, but also highlight one of the nuances she chose to include that a couple of our hall directors also include and addendum portions of their community engagement plan, which goes back to the professional development that our student staff receive that gives back to the implementation of these plans. And for Quenisha, those are microlearning groups. So during her staff meetings and as part of her professional kind of supervision approach, it's really important for her to develop her staff, but also for them to have buy-in in serving as peer developers as well. So as you can see, I know it's a little small, please forgive me, but for each month of the semester, for each semester, there are specific groups of about 3 to 4 student staff who bring different development opportunities to their staff meetings to be able to train, provide feedback, maybe provide resources, and to really knowledge share. So, and it gives back to this piece that we're all in this community engagement together. Now, I know that was probably a pretty dense middle portion. We're trying to be cognizant of time, but one of the pieces that we also wanted to highlight were how we were building out our tools for success and really measuring what we're doing and the effectiveness of our programs. So why assessment? Why are we tracking this data? How are we going to track this data? And what we're going to do with this data that's collected. And working with Georgia Tech students, these are all questions that we've heard from them. And to help kind of explain what we did for our assessment approach, I'm going to turn it back over to Andrew.
Awesome. Thank you, Mandy. Yeah, so as you can tell with assessment, this is something that we learned to have really important to us from our residential curriculum model, because we also want to be successful in our community development strategies. And so we wanted to be able to build out some tools that can answer these questions, give us data that we need so that we can move forward and make our programs better. And so by asking ourselves these questions, these are some of the answers that we came up with. And so we wanted data to show the power of the RA to resident relationship. What is that mass of connections, and what is that work that honestly takes hours and hours and hours of time by our staff? What does that mean, and what is the power of that investment? We wanted to be able to show frequency of interactions and be able to pair that with our resident satisfaction data to see how the work that we're doing is impactful when it comes to an end of the year survey. And then we also want to be able to collect information when it comes to topics so that we can better train our RAs to be more effective in their roles moving forward. And so thinking about all of that, obviously we are gonna collect data about all of our strategies that our RAs, hall directors, and everybody in the department are doing. But essentially this boiled down to wanting to develop one very unique strategy when it comes to our resident interactions. And so we came up with a resident touchpoint tracking system. This is a little bit different for us from previous years because it's a switch to a primarily quantitative data approach. In previous years, we might have RAs type up summaries and get qualitative information, but we wanted something that was going to be a little bit more nimble, quicker, less time intensive for staff to be able to enter in. So you'll see that we have a lot of checkboxes, drop-down menus, different things like that to collect all this information, but also keep it moving so we can collect the data in mass. From this, we're able to see the amount of interactions as well as the amount of unique interactions. This is helpful for our hall directors to see which residents are left behind, as well as how our RAs are doing in terms of connecting with all the residents on their floors. Like I said before, due to COVID, we opened up our method of communication a little bit in terms of allowing for some of those virtual interactions. And so we really wanted to be cognizant and collect some data about how that was happening so we can monitor the success and see how often our staff members were using different types of communication with their residents. And so in lieu of the summaries I mentioned before, we had them theme out their conversations. We had some predetermined topics that they could just click and just so we can see what kinds of conversation topics our staff are having. Again, this gives us some insight so we can use some future training, or it also helps us track some issues to address some issues mid-year. And then finally, connected to one of our measures of success is the connection to campus resources. And so asking our staff if they referred the student to a campus resource, just so we can see what kind of connections our staff are making, and again, help inform our training for future years. So with that, we had to start actually building out the actual assessment. And so our tool here at Georgia Tech is Qualtrics. And so I'm sure many of you might be familiar with that tool. But as we were building it out, we wanted to make sure we had cleaner and clearer data. In previous iterations of our assessment, As you can imagine, we have 238 RAs on campus, all that data going into one pool, and it can potentially make a little bit of a mess. And so we made some intentional decisions this year. So instead of having a form that can fill out multiple interactions at once, we went to one form to fill out for one interaction, but we figured out how that loop itself to us. And again, what that does is gives us one data entry on each line of data that's collected. It makes it a little bit clearer for us to report, build out reports, and look at that data on the back end. The other thing that Qualtrics has for us is the ability to create reports, and actually gives some really good credit to Mandy, who is able to she taught herself how to make some of those reports, which really kind of helped to turn the tide on how we were managing that data. We're able to get that data in hall directors' hands very frequently, and we're able to customize those reports per area. And then we have the ability also within Qualtrics to customize those forms so that they can be used in different ways for our different areas. For example, one of my areas, we are building out a second-year experience program, and we're able to add in a qualitative approach for one of our guided conversations this year. And with that, I'm actually going to turn it over right back to Mandy to give us a little bit of an example of the data that we collected when it comes to our resident interactions.
Yeah, thank you, Andrew. So this is just a snippet of actually a couple different reports that my hall directors receive on a weekly basis. And so one of the pieces that Pasch kind of talked about is he went through and actually at the beginning of the semester built out the resident interaction logs for each of our areas. So that way we knew first off that the tool we're using was continued and the same across all 5. Really, there are 5 areas that kind of encompass hall director supervision, and we wanted to make sure that that data collection process was identical. So when we receive back this information, the way that we interpret and use is, one, how are our residents being connected with? What is the frequency that they're being connected with? And as one of the pieces that Andrew spoke to, who are our outliers that we haven't had a touch point with, and how are they doing? And so when I provide this information back to my hall director staff, it's not just, here's this information, read it. We review it together. This is part of our weekly one-on-ones. They get the information typically on a Friday, and we review it for the next week's meetings. During the space, we talk about, where are some areas for our RA development, and, we look at kind of the number of responses, and just to kind of quantify, what may be some pieces we need to check in with our staff about the frequency of interactions that they're having. But more importantly, the information we glean is the types of interactions that they're having. Another aspect of the report that we're able to kind of generate information from that's not demonstrated here, though, are pieces within those specific conversations. And so one of the pieces that Andrew's going to talk about is how we utilize this information to capture resident conversations, either through these weekly interactions that aren't necessarily scaled, or for the example Andrew's about to provide, how we scale resident conversations to seek specific information.
Awesome. Thank you, Mandy. Yeah, so as I mentioned before, in my area, we are building out a second-year experience program. We're a little bit in a pilot year and wanted to take some time to collect a lot of data to inform us as we're building out that program with an official kickoff for next year. And so we were able to insert some qualitative pieces and really ask our RAs to do some guided conversations, or really what it ended up being is kind of one-on-one focus groups, be able to pool a bunch of information to guide us. And so we're building out that program. And obviously, due to COVID, we had some dedensification that actually brought some first-year students into my apartment complex. That actually gave us a really interesting opportunity to collect data across many different class levels, so we can compare the data that we were looking at. And so between a mix of qualitative and quantitative approach, we're able to assess the importance and relevance of our programs and focus areas. And so I'll give you a brief snapshot of some of the things we learned from that. This year, health and well-being was top of mind. Obviously not breathtaking, likely due to COVID, but also we saw that COVID was just on their minds. And this is just kind of the lens and filter that they were seeing everything through. One of our focus areas was life skills and adulting. And for whatever reason, our sophomore students were just not understanding that concept. So it lets us know that we need to go back to the drawing table and better define that topic and focus area. And then finally, we also saw a desire for connection with experienced upper class students. And so again, likely due to COVID in the classroom experience, but it gives us an idea to potentially build out a mentorship program within our sophomore experience program. And so I share this just as a little bit of like obviously we had a lot of quantitative data, but we're also able to merge in some qualitative opportunities to really kind of meet our different areas' needs. And with that, that is kind of the end of the content section of our presentation. Obviously, we hope to be able to answer some questions, but before we do that, I'm going to turn it over to Chris to lead us through a little bit of an activity.
Yes, activity. Put your thinking caps on, everyone. All right, so we're going to be breaking into some breakout rooms, and we're going to do a community engagement retrospection. So this is a tool that we've utilized at our institution. So if you want to go ahead and take a screen grab or take a picture of the screen right now, these are the questions that you're going to answer within that. So what does your residence education model do well? What challenges do you face? What would you do differently? And what would you do moving forward? So through the context of what your residence education model looks like, what does it do well? What challenges are there? What do you do differently? And then what will you do moving forward? So we're gonna go ahead and do the breakouts now. We're trying to do at least 3 people in each breakout room, but if you get 4, then you can have that, just discuss it within your breakout room. And we'll be there for about 5 minutes.
Hey, Sherry Murray. Oh, you're on mute.
Hey, Sherry.
Can y'all help me get to my room? I'm on my desktop too. And when y'all did the broke out, you just threw me. So I'm in my room, but not in my room where they can hear me.
Let's see what we can do.
Thank y'all.
What room are you supposed to be in?
Yeah,
Okay, I can do that.
thank you.
And Chris, I'm not sure if I was able to tell you this. Like, we are able to stay on a little bit after time to answer questions too, so we can always just hang out.
Fantastic.
Ten, 9, 8, 7, 6, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Happy New Year.
And we're back. Welcome to the main room. The judges have deliberated. Just well, we appreciate everyone kind of engaging in that conversation. We aren't going to do a report back, but we wanted to just ensure that everyone had an opportunity to reflect and discuss and just see what other people might be doing at their institutions. So we're going to go ahead and move on to just like questions. We're ending with questions. So we'll monitor the chat. For questions.
I have a question about your assessment pieces, which were super cool. Are you just pulling that from, I know you said you were pulling that kind of from your EBI data and then compiling it, but and then you said something about home growing. So do you have a homegrown system that kind of tracks the engagement in different pieces like that? And, or is it something else? Because it looked really cool.
Sure. So a lot of our metrics are being reported through either our, I think we do EBI like every other year, but we also do some sort of internal, I can't remember exactly which service we use. And that's where we get all of our metrics that we talked about at the beginning. And then all the pieces that we built out was really just kind of evaluate the work that our team is doing so we can compare that data to the metrics that we're pulling from the satisfaction and EBI surveys that we do at the end of the year.
Okay.
I know one question we have in the chat is, what is your RA to student ratio? So I believe our RA to student ratio is 1 to 25.
That's the average.
The average, yes.
Yeah. Last year we did kind of a resorting of our student staff to resident ratio. That way we were able to utilize some more abundant staff we had in our first year areas to move them to our upperclassmen communities so we could scale down the typical staff member to resident ratio. And there's actually another question in the chat. Can you talk more about why you're moving away from the curriculum and or what you see as the biggest difference between what you have now and the curricular approach? Sure. I would say, and Chris and Andrew, feel free to chime in. Our biggest shift came in the summer of 2018. We had a lot of interdepartmental personnel changes, and one of those pieces at that time was when our then kind of newly hired, just over a year in position, Director of Residence Life left for another opportunity back at a previous institution, and our now current Director of Residence Life, Dr. Cherie Gibson, was named interim, and she's now officially in that role for almost a year, I think. And one of the pieces of direction that Cherie kind of gave us, and also just from listening to pieces that we've heard from our staff and from our students over the course of the year, was the curriculum approach just didn't seem to work with our student type. We had, I think for me, we had essentially been fighting to really have a true curricular model where we had that engagement and that learning that was happening in our halls. And, you know, we didn't give in, but we're like, we hear you, we listen to what you're doing, and we really need to get back to the piece to the basics of how are our folks who live with us doing, and do they feel connected to the community that they live in? And we found that kind of retooling the way and the approach that we did was better done through the current system that we're exploring than through a curricular model.
Great question. We do know that it is time now. So we want to thank everyone for coming to this presentation. There is an evaluation link in the chat, and so please fill that out. If you would like to stay back and ask some more questions, we will be here. We have our emails here, so if you want to reach out to us to ask additional questions or to gather some resources, we're happy to do that as well.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Yeah, thank you, everybody.
On behalf of SEAHO, thank you, Mandy, Andrew, and Chris for spending time presenting to our attendees today. We appreciate you taking the time out. So thank you very much for that. For everyone else, please don't forget to do the evaluation as stated, and feel free to stay around and chat with the presenters.
Thank you so much, Dante, for helping moderating.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you.
I see a question in the chat from Brian. Is Qualtrics able to be used without institutional support? Brian, I guess the answer would probably be probably. I know this is a service that is free to us because Georgia Tech has a contract with Qualtrics, and so we're able to utilize that service and software without any of our own personal expense. And I'm not sure what it looks like individually cost-wise, but I would gather that they probably have the opportunity to purchase individually or for an institution.
Yeah, they have a free version, but it doesn't do nearly.
It doesn't have all the bells and whistles. Yeah, and I would gather the bells and whistles missing are a lot of the pieces that we use on the back end for our reporting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was looking at my institution to see if we had Qualtrics because this is what I wanted to do.
Uh-huh.
But, yeah, because we're Office 365 school, and we have the Microsoft Forms. We use a lot to get surveyed to how to forward. There's no statistical analysis or anything like that. We can't really do reporting or anything like with the form. So I was just trying to gauge and see. I'll talk to our assessment office and see what they have.
And while it's you know, maybe not as an intuitive backend service as Qualtrics is, and I'm not sure what kind of current tool or metric that you're using, but say you're using Microsoft Forms, if you have like an Office 365 suite. One of the pieces that is actually pretty easy for when you get the data on the back end from those forms and it being transferred to Excel is, and there's a lot of actually really great tools just on YouTube about how you can manipulate that data and clean that data so you can turn it into a presentable way to really tell the story that your data is trying to tell. You just have to kind of help to share them up in a way that is communicable to the audience you're trying to present to. So one of the things I would actually encourage folks who are still on just to lean into that, depending on what data collection metric that you're or tool that you're using currently, there's always a way to translate that data to tell the story that you're collecting. It just may be a little bit of self-learning. I know, you know, Andrew mentioned I did a lot of kind of self-teaching about Qualtrics and understanding, you know, how we're kind of gathering the data, cleaning the data, and presenting the data back to not only our hall directors, since they're utilizing this piece to track how their folks are doing in their halls, but also for our leadership, so they're also able to demonstrate the effectiveness of our approach. Also, if you have access through your institutions to LinkedIn Learning, there are a lot of really great modules on there. There's one specifically about data storytelling that I've referred to back a couple of times. It's really helped to kind of refocus the way that I see and interpret data, and how it's a really powerful tool. But sometimes you just need to learn how to do a pivot table.
Thank you, Mandy. I appreciate that so much.
Absolutely.
Hi, I don't know if my question is more of a reach out to you guys via email, or if it just got overlooked in the chat. But
Oh, so sorry if it did.
that's okay. I'm working on updating the residential student experience type manual for our students here at Mercer. And so I would love to have any sort of examples that anyone else has, or if you guys would be able to send that, I can email you, any of the three of you, so you can forward that over.
Sure. It's Nicole, correct?
Yes.
Nicole, if you want to reach out, I'm happy to set up a meeting with you, maybe sometime next week. And I'm happy, and Chris and Pasch, of course, can join as well. And we can review our full 40-page and kind of just go over those nuances and kind of talk about where your group is sitting and how something similar could serve your institution or your department.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, my email or any of our emails is going to be the best way to get us.
Perfect. Thank you.
Absolutely. Sorry that if you got overlooked.
That's okay.
And I'll have someone from my team reaching out to you all soon as well, just so you know.
Just be prepared.
Exactly. We've
good.
been doing the curricular approach, and we've definitely been trying to jam it down the throats of our staff and
It's just not being
students.
received.
And yeah, it's just not received. You know, just trying to get our own staff on board with it is the challenge. And so yeah, we're looking at, hey, why does it have to be defined as a curricular approach? Why does it have to be defined? Let's just do what's best for the students, and we'll call it what it is whenever we figure out what it is.
Yeah. And, you know, and the curricular approach, you know, there's a lot of kind of hallmarks and expectations that are tied with fully implementing that. That's true to kind of the vision and spirit of a residential curriculum. And when you start making modifications to kind of the spirit of the residential curriculum is when you essentially start moving away from it. And so, you know, when I completely remember the day Dr. Gisson sat down with us in July of 2018. I think Andrew, no, you weren't away on your study abroad at that point, but it was essentially we had been planning to do another iteration of a curricular model. And it was, we need to talk about this because it's not working. And while that kind of meeting was a little bit anxiety inducing, the next day I'm like, makes complete sense. It's exactly what we needed to do. I think that our student staff buy-in has jumped tremendously. The way that they see what we do and why we do what we do, they can communicate that, which is, you know, for me specifically, when we're in our residential student experience model, they had a hard time actually explaining what they were doing kind of when they were putting on these different programs. And for me, that's kind of hard kind of data point to see when I have a student staff member who can't tell me what they're doing, from our approach of making folks feel like they're at home with us.
I think the other thing I'll add is we obviously learned a lot about curriculum and how to collect data and like have everything have a purpose. And so while what we're doing is not a curricular approach per se, there's still a lot of components that we kept just because that works. I mean, especially from the data collection, that mindset kind of helps us out. But really, it's just also just getting back to the building blocks of what does community mean? And we accomplish that with some curricular tools, but it's just not a full-fledged curriculum anymore.
Yep, not a full abandonment of curriculum, keeping those building blocks, like you said, but yeah, changing up some of the pieces.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, I just wanted to say hi to the, is there a feedback on my audio?
You sound clear now.
Okay, great. I just wanted to say hi. I'm Dennis Lynch from Air St. Gross, and I worked with Casey Helton and Dr. Cotton on the master plan for the renovations of the East Halls over the past year. In fact, I think we have one more presentation to give to the University System of Georgia coming up in a few weeks, but enjoyed the presentation. And as an architect and planner, we have collected a lot of data over the years that we use about the kinds of spaces that you have in residence halls to facilitate the kind of interaction that you guys were talking about. So it's really interesting to see the way you guys collect data on the kinds of interactions that your RAs have with your students and whatnot. Because, you know, as architects, we can build spaces that we hope foster those interactions, but we can't make them happen the way you guys do. So it's just interesting to get a peek into the way you guys, the kinds of data you collect and the way you use it to fine tune your programs. So just wanted to say hi.
Hi, Dennis. Well, thank you so much. And I will say that the physical updates that we've had on campus, especially with the sprint that really started last summer with all the renovations, has really helped to, I think, just increase the way that our students feel at home in their physical spaces. So thank you so much for that feedback, and thank you for your continued work that you've been doing and partnering with us.
Great. Great to meet you all.
Nice to meet you as well.
Nice to meet you as well.
Well, cool.
Any other last questions?
Just one more in the chat. So with programming data, what are the bases of the components? How to get students to complete surveys? That's a great question. So for our student staff are the ones who are specifically logging that data, and it's built into some of their expectations for their role. So our hall directors and the kind of quick clip that the slide that I spoke to, that's just one of the components of the survey reports that the hall directors receive each week. They get a breakdown, kind of a snapshot, and the visual aid that I referred to was actually the snapshot of the RA interaction report. So it starts off with how many interactions have been logged, and then which staff have been logging those interactions. And then it scales out to the type of interaction, whether it was done in person or another means, and then like what they talked about and potentially what was discussed. That would be an additional layer that for resident conversations like what Andrew spoke to. And so if we see staff that maybe aren't necessarily reporting on those pieces, that goes back to you know, a development conversation between the student staff member and the supervising hall director, and just talking about kind of the need and expectations. So it's more of accountability conversation. One of the pieces that we're really strategic about during our student staff training, and I know Chris, Andrew, and I just did a training for our new staff in January, was communicating the importance and the why behind why we asked them to collect this information. And it's a huge charge from our leadership. One of the pieces that our director was really fearful of during this time, especially during COVID, are the students who are alone in their rooms all day and don't have any interaction. And I just had a student of concern call this week that we're working through that's the exact situation. So we wanted to make sure that this is something that our staff are able to do, that they're able to do easily, because that was one of the pieces we wanted to make sure that this tool wasn't requiring a lot of bandwidth from them, but it also still gathered the information we need and to the extent of the information we needed.